So this afternoon we are privileged to have a good friend of Life Work Leadership here. He's all the way from Oudendaal's Rus. Now, if you know where that is, I don't know, you must get a life, but you must get out more. No, of course we're joking. Oudendaal's Rus is close to Welkom, and Andre Styger is an attorney. Yes, God can save and use lawyers, and he is also heading up Crown Ministries in Africa, I believe. So can we just give a Life Work welcome to Andre? So Andre, I didn't read your whole long CV, to the people this afternoon. I'll give you an opportunity throughout the interview to just share, a little bit about your life and achievements and so on. If we can go way back, tell us about the Andre that was 5 years old, or a few months old, however far back you can remember. Okay. The childhood of Andre Styger.
Thanks, Ron. I think my first memories that I do have was growing up on a farm, typical Free State farm. And maybe whilst I'm at that point, you all know the saying, but it's true even if you're an attorney, if you're from a Free State, you only use English in self-defense, so please pardon me for messing up the M's and R's. But I grew up on the farm. That was some of my first memories. And then the memories that followed shortly after that is that my father lost the farm. He went insolvent. We went back to town. I remember that day, particularly when we had to upload the lorry to go back to town. And my father fortunately had some background in city administration. He became what's today known as the municipal manager, those days the town clerk. And we moved to Oudendaal's Rus, which is a mining community. 95%, if not more, of the people's parents and worked on the mines, so you had that kind of influence. And then after that, I went to study law at Bloemfontein and came back to my home roots, came back to home and started in the law practice.
So while you were studying law there in Bloemfontein, we're not going to ask you which year that was, but were you the typical student like the rest of us? You were still putting in the extra effort to work on your testimony during those years, or did you go to church services on Friday evenings?
Yeah, well, that's maybe more of the latter. I grew up privileged. There's no hiding that. Although, we went insolvent as a family, we were guarded against it. We never knew it afterwards. When I did my father's estate, I only realized, the financial woes he had to go through and the way he honored his debt, but that's besides the point. At university, I'm afraid to say, if the first year was not a success, I didn't know the Lord. I grew up in a religious home, more of the traditional church background. So, Sunday and Monday was two different things, and you didn't intend, especially when you went out on a Friday. But in my first year, I only passed one or two of my subjects, if I recall correctly. And when my results came, my dad had an honest heart-to-heart discussion with me, and he said to me, is this your best? And I lied to him, and I said, yes, it is. And he said to me, okay, if it's your best, I'll keep on paying, and you keep on trying. And that was kind of a conviction for me. When he walked away, I realized you just flat out lied to your father now. And that just caught up with me, and I realized, listen, this is not the way it's going to work. So I approached him. I moved out of the hostel, moved into a flat on my own. And the second year, I took both my first and second year, all 14 subjects at that stage, and I passed all of them. And by God's grace, I was one of the only 10% who finished our degree in 4 years. Wow. That's when it really happened, professionally speaking. The second year at varsity, when I realized, this is it. Call it a day and get serious. But as far as the Lord is concerned, he was somebody I consulted before a test, especially if it was a tough test, and I would consult him a bit longer. And then after that, I kind of forgot to say thank you, and then it would remind me, oh yes, thank you, that kind of thing. And that was just the way it happened for the first part of my life until I got into the profession.
When did you meet your wife?
My wife, I met her in Kroonstad, and we had a mutual friend. She was she won't mind me telling this. It's a testimony on her own. She was at that stage still a minor, 20 years old, divorced, 2 daughters, grade 10, started 8 in those days, and living with an unemployed father and mother and 3 brothers in a flat in Kroonstad. So my friend called me. She worked at the restaurant to sustain the whole family, basically, the Spur there in Kroonstad, and he's the manager, and he said, listen, I'd like to introduce you to somebody. And I was just scarcely started practicing in Welkom, and I said, yeah, that sounds good. It's a next logical step to get a wife, you know. But he refrained to say to me all the details. I thought, you know, it's just what you would today can probably call normal. But in any case, having met her, and I realized, no, there's more to it. I mean, she's actually divorced and so on. But in any case, we met in Kroonstad, but through God's grace, we just hit it off from the word go. And 6 months later, we were married, believe it or not. But I might say, before I forget to come back to it, she's a teacher. She got an honors degree, she got a matric. We adopted the 2 daughters, and God really, that's it, like I say, a testimony on its own. But as a family, we're happily married now I think we're going for our 23rd year now. So.
Wow, yeah, great testimony. Of course, it's already a miracle in its own that you could meet someone in Kroonstad and then fall in love. So anyone from Kroonstad here? I apologize. That explains a lot, Henry. As an attorney, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the firm where you're involved in Welkom. What do you specialize in? What is your typical day at the office look like? Okay,
well, obviously, we all started out those days, for those who remember LA Law, you know, the boot closing, and we all had those dreams as lawyers. So I went to study law with the LA Law dream. I think today's equivalent will be suits, for those of you who are a bit younger. So it started out that way, and I had one mission, and that's to be a partner in a big law firm, or have your own big law firm before the age of 30. And I was working hard towards that. So at the age of 29, I became a partner in the biggest law firm in Welkom, in the Free State, which doesn't say much. I mean, there's nothing. You look big in a small tank if you're a fish, but I mean, the point is, it was the biggest law firm. And lo and behold, there's only one glass building, and I got the corner office. And, you know, looking outside of the window, the right car was there, and everything was just honky-dory. And most of us started out on litigation, doing the typical lawyer thing, and then later on, I was asked if I wouldn't head up a new division because we had a vacancy in conveyancing, property law. Went there, by God's grace, we had to build up an enormous practice, and then because of my involvement with Crown, I started spending less time at the office, and my partners released me a bit more. And because of what we were busy with Crown, moving on towards legacy planning and so forth, I started paying attention to the estates department, helping people, you know, build an eternal portfolio, not just an earthy portfolio. And more or less, that's where I'm now. So if you're asking my typical day today, it's basically structuring. You know, we see a lot of people on the BEE deals, structuring those kind of deals, and then that flows into estate planning, and then that flows into legacy planning. Say to a guy, you know, although you might not take it with, you can send it ahead. And seeing that we're now dealing with your portfolio, let's look at all the portfolios. So it's an ideal situation to minister also. But yes, the ministry does take up some of our time, but through God's grace, it's with the blessing of my family and my partners that I could be here today. So.
Before we get to the ministry and what, you know, you guys do at Crown, in your personal life, when did Jesus become a reality to you? You told us that you grew up in a religious home, but somewhere, you know, what happened for you to cause you to move into that personal relationship?
It all happened around about 31. What happened is when I got the partnership, I don't have a rags to riches story. God actually came and he got me right on the top of my career, of his profession. And what happened is when I got the partnership, growing up religiously, I knew of God, but I didn't know Him. But I knew that this is supernatural, something more to it. And I was kind of then starting to seek, because, Lord, if I have all these blessings at this age, what is happening? What's going on? And then, believe it or not, right outside here, Pretoria, a lady forced me into attending a camp which is called Woord en Aksie. And I was there, and there was an advocate, and he was preaching the word. And at that stage, he explained to me the gospel in simple terms. And I thought, okay, now I get it. And at that stage, I started to understand it. But that evening, coming back home that Sunday, and I started meditating on this, I really grasped it. The Holy Spirit opened it up to me. I realized what Jesus did, and it was like somebody pouring a bucket of water over me, and everything from there on changed dramatically. With that, within a couple of weeks, I attended a Crown small group study, because then I realized there's no Monday thing and Sunday thing. It must be the same thing, but how do we manifest this? And I went to a Crown small group study on personal finances, and I understood righteousness now, but how do you live righteousness? How do you live righteously? And then in this small group setting, it all just opened up for me when I dealt with God regarding ownership, and I realized that none of this that I have is mine, not even the profession, none of it. I'm merely a steward, and I've got certain responsibilities. And we took those principles, and the church that I was at that stage had enormous financial problems, and I was the chair of the financial committee. And within a couple of weeks, we had if I can maybe shortly share this, I don't know what our time looked like, but we had a special church meeting to get rid of our minister, because we could no longer afford him. So what happened, we called this meeting, and I remember the date. I actually discovered the agenda the other day. And I was dealing with God in a lot of things. You must understand, there's nothing as dangerous as a newborn Christian, and right from the word back now. So there I was, and we were having this meeting, and I was meditating that stage on Matthew 6, verse 33. First seek God's kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things were added. And I was reading up on Hudson Taylor, who was in China, and he said, God's work done God's way will never lack God's provision. And these things were fresh for me, and I had the Crown principles on how to handle money and stewardship principles. And I went to the church council, and I said, listen, we must ask ourselves, if this is God's church, does He want to close it down? And everybody said no. And I said, well, then we'd better ask some questions. And we walked away from that church council meeting. Instead of getting rid of our minister, which we couldn't afford to do because we couldn't pay his severance package, we decided that we're going to do something serious. And at that stage, the congregation was 95 years old, if I recall correctly. And we decided it's maybe time that we start believing. And we shared some of these principles. And we ended up that evening drafting a budget which was 300% higher than the budget we just couldn't meet. So we just decided we will go out in faith. And we had to share that with the congregation. Obviously, you can't ask your minister to do so because his job is on the line. I had the privilege of sharing the vision, and I believe what God put on our hearts there. And at that stage, the congregation was about $500,000 in debt, which is not maybe big for this, but back those days for a platteland dorpie, that was a lot of money. And we shared the vision, and I recall, and this is getting to your question, when did Jesus become real? I recall our head elder sitting there and saying, guys, I like this idea of believing, and going out in faith, but we've got to be realistic about this. It's a mining town. The mine's closing down. We lost 100,000 jobs in that area. You do not realize the impact it has on the community. Everything is shrinking. The schools, the congregations, everything. The economy has collapsed. No, so just be realistic when you decide on this. In any case, and we said, well, realistic or not, we're going to have to trust God on this one. You have to listen to what I'm saying. As a matter of fact, which is so ironic, ons kanselkleed, I don't know what that is in English, was God will provide for about 50 years. standing in front of that, saying, God will provide. We shared this vision and said, listen, we felt God put it on our hearts to go out in faith. And we had to ask ourselves the questions of Hudson Taylor. What is God's work? What are we called for? And how do we do it God's way? And once we had that, we trust that God will make sure that there will be provision for that. In a matter of 7 months, to make a long story short, we were out of debt. It was not a farmer or a business person. People became faithful stewards, not on giving, on everything. Stewardship is more than giving. I don't know where we got to reducing God to 10% God, but once they became faithful, everything changed. And the congregation went from an overdraft and a debt of 500,000 to a credit of 200,000. And we had to have a special church council meeting as to what to do with all this money. I went back in our financial records for 64 years. We've never been out of debt. And during that church council sitting, deciding what to do with all this money, the same elder who made the remark for me was sitting there, and this is where the change comes in. And he had eyes this big, and he was looking at the wall. And I realized for the first time in his life, the penny dropped. You see, we have a problem growing up in church. We grow up with the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and Jesus Christ in one sentence. And we struggle to distinguish between fact and fiction until God shows up and He becomes real for us. And that changed the entire congregation. And it started flowing over to a town. And Crown came to hear of this some way or another. And then they started asking me, listen, would you just share your testimony where we operate? And I would do more or less what we would do today. And then later on, a speaker wouldn't show up and they would ask me, would you take his place? And well, that's the beginning. And at the end of the day, Crown has asked me if I would head up the African mission. But I actually deviated. That's when Jesus became real to me, when I saw what He does in people's lives. And it was on a financial playing field. He became real to me in my kitchen that evening, that Sunday. But seeing the impact it has when He meets people on a marketplace in real terms, not during a Sunday service only, that is what changed it for me.
I think quite often we think that the God of the Bible and the times of the Bible and God today is different. And miracles, happened in those days, and only a few and far between. But I think the question quite often is God still interested in us today? And could He be bothered with our circumstances or our challenges and so on? Now, at one of our previous sessions, we during our retreat, we discussed the topic of calling. And, as you know, there are a lot of business people in the room. And one of the questions we discussed, and which I also want to ask to you then, is can someone be called to do business? Aren't you just called for the pulpit? Aren't you just called for pastoral, ministry on a Sunday? Is it possible to serve God and live your calling through your business?
Well, I can only share my journey. Obviously, when this radical change came in my life, I had a lot of catch up to do. Fortunately, repentance was quick. You could write off 30 years with true repentance, but looking forward, I realized we've got to pick it up now. And I went to God and I said, Lord, please release me. I'd like to go into full-time ministry. I got this financial ideas and Crown is here. I really felt led for full-time ministry. And the message was so profound. God made it clear to me. He said, listen, I've got enough pastors. I need a couple of lawyers. Just stay where you are. And so I became convicted to stay in the profession. And I can tell you, it's beautiful how God works this out. The platforms that open up because you're in the market instead of from the pulpit. When we minister to business people, business by the book, and talk about principles, I see what pastors have got to deal with. Whenever a pastor gives a sound business principle, you get this kind of, pastor, come into the real world and then we'll talk again, that kind of thing. Now, coming from the ministry field, then you can say, listen, but I am in your so-called real world. And this is how the things work and this is how it manifests. So I actually, and don't take this the wrong way, I pity the pastors and the people that we believe have been called to take the gospel forward. I mean, one of the verses that changed my life was in Ephesians 4. We all know the fivefold ministry from 11, where he says he gave us the apostles, and the evangelists and the prophets and all of that. But then the very next word was to do what? To equip the saints. And we are the saints. To equip the saints for what? Their work of ministry. Okay, to do what? To mature the body of Christ, so that they won't fall for worldviews and doctrines and so forth. Go read it. Now, if you ask yourself as a business person, if we have to go to the Great Commission, our pastors, and that's why I say I pity them, see mostly the same people on a Sunday for an hour. Roughly put, I know it's not as simple as that, but for we as business people, we see hundreds of people, 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. I mean, really, who can really impact the kingdom? Who's ideally situated to impact the kingdom? If I can just minister for a short while, because this is part of, to answer your question. If we look at some of the statistics, I mean, of Jesus' 142 public appearances that we read of in the Gospel, 132 of those were in the marketplace. Jesus has 52 parables. 45 of those were in context of the marketplace. But what changed me is when Jesus chose his 12, not a single one, as far as we know, came from the church of the day. He got them all from the marketplace. Now, somebody shared it with me and I saw it, physically saw it. The picture of this man walking with his boy, his son, to a shop, and getting inside the store, there was inventory that had to take. There was probably orders that had to be filled. There was competition. It was a carpentry shop, not the only carpenter. And I don't know if there was staff, but when seeing that and it pulled back and I saw the shop name, Joseph Incorporated, I realized that the boy was Jesus. That is how he grew up for the first part of his life. No surprise that the marketplace was so close to him. What got me, and when I heard the previous speaker as well, you know how many of us will try to say, if I can just speak with Mr. Ramaphosa, if I can just get to the church so-and-so or whatever. But if we follow Jesus' model, he never made an appointment with a single politician or church leader of the day. They all came to him. His approach was, get into the field, engage the people. They took note of him. As a matter of fact, they had to force him to go and meet with them. He didn't sit in a queue for 4 hours hoping to get a glimpse of the leaders. They took note, and I believe we should follow that approach. And I believe for us as business people, this is it. This is it. If we can engage on that level, when your desk, when your front desk becomes your pulpit, something changed. I mean, it's beautiful when I engage with colleagues and business people. I mean, I know of lawyers, and it's not me because I'm not doing that work. I know of lawyers who in the mornings put out their divorce files. They come in early in the office and they pray over those files. Say, Lord, there's chance of reconciliation here. Lord, this child is suffering because there's no father or he's an alcoholic. Please, be merciful. I know of teachers that go to school early in the mornings, stand behind chairs, anoint the chairs, and Lord, this one's got a problem. Lord, please help us here. Lord, please do this. I mean, if that school bell rings and those Philistines come running, I mean, they run into the Holy Spirit. I mean, and that's the way we approach it. Now, can you imagine thinking it's a Sunday thing? Wow. I mean, what do I do Sundays? Sundays, I go to my pastor, my apostle, my prophet, to equip me for my work of ministry. And when does that happen? Monday. Do you get inspired by the 10:40 window? Forget it. Get inspired by the 8 to 5 window. I'm telling you, that's where the impact happens. That's where leadership is happening. So I would not trade my job for yours or for any pastors or whatever for a day. Not for a single day. And still, I get the platforms to share the gospel and the principles of God. So I'm missing out on nothing.
I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And again, pastors, we love you. And we don't want to offend you in any way. You're very precious to us. but the business people we want to challenge to take up those callings and go and do the work of ministry, Monday to Friday or Saturday and the in-betweens. You know, our pulpits are just different from the pastors on the Sundays. So we're preaching to the converted here. We really agree with you. You mentioned Crown Ministries a few times now. Maybe for those who don't know, because we've become quite good friends, and you know, life work, leadership, and Crown Ministries are aligned, even in the US. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what does Crown do and what is your role there?
All right. I'll avoid statistics in the sense that it's the biggest stewardship ministry in how many countries. I think what is important is the heart of Crown, which I love. A lot of people, when you talk about stewardship, they think it's about, get out of debt, start to tithe and do some savings. And most people think stewardship entails that. The problem and the question we ask at Crown is, where does Jesus fit in here? Because with all due respect, those three concepts you can get from any worldly book as well. You know, get out of debt, invest, and basically start saving. And so the whole idea, to get to your question, is stewardship starts with ownership. Meaning that if I don't want to say understand it, because it's not a matter of understanding it. If you grasp the concept of God's ownership, your life can never be the same again, because then you understand you're a steward. If I can just sidetrack for a minute, and I'm not going to go into that, but just to challenge you on that. Your land cannot be taken because it isn't yours to start with. If it's so-called taken, stewardship is just passed on. I mean, if I want to just remind me that I come back to this to share what the Zimbabwean farmers went through and the testimonies we have with them while working in Zimbabwe. But the idea of Crown is to get people to a point where every financial decision becomes a spiritual decision. Now, if you think of how much time a day you spend on money, making it, spending it, worrying about it, I don't care. How much of your day goes into money? Can you imagine if you can put money and God together, how much of your day will go into God? When every financial decision becomes a spiritual decision, your intimacy of Christ breaks through to a level that I can't even begin to describe. That's where Christ fits in. If I fail with my savings, if I have so much debt that I'm looking at insolvency, so be it. We need to address those things in terms of biblical understanding. But in the words of what Jesus has said in Mark 8, what does it help you conquer the world and lose your soul? So Crown uses the topic of money with the hidden agenda to get people to become more intimate with Christ. And that's, in short, basically what it's about. And what is so nice about money is the only universal language that I can think of. Doesn't matter where you go in the world, people understand money. And that gives you the opportunity to speak about stewardship.
You wanted to tell us about the Zim farms?
Oh yeah, the Zim farms. We were in Malawi, and I met up with a Zim farmer. And I was only prompted by that because of the previous discussion that we've had regarding, black people, white people, and so forth. And this Zim farmer, we met in Malawi, of all places, in the guest house, sharing breakfast. And he was sharing with me the fact that he's lost his farm twice, and what it did to him. And I just kept quiet and I let him speak. And I'm not saying this is where South Africa is moving. I want to get to a principle here. And it moved to a stage where he had to deal with God. And in his testimony, so profound, where he said to me, I understand that we're not allowed to ask God why, because he doesn't have to account to us. That was his words. All we can ask God is, what now? How do we take this forward? He said, but he wanted to ask God why. And God answered him with a what now? And what he got is, go back to the farm and serve the guy that took the farm. Go explain to him why certain things doesn't work on the farm and certain things work this way, and so forth. And his testimony was, he said, the minute, I mean, you can imagine what should go through your heart if you have to show up for that. Try to imagine that one. He said in a minute he went into a steward and into a serving position. He said, I want to serve you. He said something broke in him. And his words was, and this is why it was prompted, he said, you know, I grew up on the farm with black children. We shared the same bed, the same food. He said, I was no racist. He said, but the moment I started to serve, a piece of inherent racism came loose that I never knew existed. The moment I took on the stature of my Savior, and God restored him. The reason why he was in Malawi that stage, he was there with United Nations money, teaching people how to farm, and more than he could earn on the farm in Zimbabwe. But that's just the story of that, which I don't want to go into. But dealing with this, because that is his words that I've just said, when he realized it, it's not mine. I'm a steward. And I better make sure that the next person is a faithful steward, even if it's legacy planning. I mean, if your children accurately understands your estate planning and that you are a steward, and by drafting a will, you are not passing on property, you are passing on responsibility. If your children is trained to accept that responsibility, you will find the child coming to you and say, Dad, please take me out of your will. I'm not ready to take this responsibility. That is where we start, and I can understand why Jesus said you cannot serve mammon and God. That's the only place in the Bible where he is willing to recognize that other force that you can choose of. And this is the simple way it manifests on money, possession. I mean, there's a whole emotion about this all. It's one thing, you know, to start asking ourselves, how should we approach the spirit beings? But we need to make it real. I mean, if I may, maybe just talk on that, because Rick taught me something, Rick Moser, that we've referred to in the previous session. There is no such thing as a Christian worldview. It's a contradiction in terms. Just as you can't say no Lord. You can't say no Lord. I mean, then if you say no, he's not Lord. There's no such thing as saying no Lord. There's no Christian worldview as well. You either have a worldview or a kingdom view. And the way we test this, and me coming from a religious background, from a conservative Afrikaans church, I understand that's better now. When I was caught up in religion, I only wanted to do one thing, is to go home one day to Jesus. I wanted to leave this place and just go to heaven. But when I started understanding kingdom principles, I want to change this world. I don't want to leave it. That's a kingdom view, not a worldview. If you're caught up in religion, you probably can't wait to just go home to Jesus. But this is it. Get a kingdom view and say to yourself, Lord, but I want to change this. And that's what I like about the previous session as well. I pick up the spirit of that, the sense of it. And just to circumvent back to the previous question, man, I don't want to be in any place else than in the marketplace to do this. I mean, that's the universal language. Listen to any commentator. The actual showdown that we're experiencing now is between the haves and the have-not, the employed and unemployed. And all of that relates to money, possessions. Whose land is it? Who's got the jobs? Who's got the power? And now the question is that I want to ask, that Crown asks, where did Jesus fit into this? Only with the way I approach it? So do I now have an agenda to go and meet with the president and sharing his principles? No. I'd like to meet the people.
I had the privilege to go through the Business by the Book course of Crown probably 10 years ago, and I was a teacher before, and I basically then just at that time started my own business and wanted to grow it, and then I was challenged with this reality, but is it your business you're starting or is it mine? And are you working for me? And it started challenging those worldviews and those deeply held beliefs I had. And a few years into thinking that I owned this business, my then manager / close to being a partner, overnight chose to break away and took basically 3/4 of the business. And all of a sudden, where I normally sleep very well at night, I started stressing about stuff, and I started waking up having these, nightmares where I'm busy strangling someone. And it was as if God was saying to me at that time, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "God, I'm angry." And it was as if he was saying, "But what are you angry about?" And I would say, "But they stole from me." And then he said, "But I thought you said it's my business." So then who did they steal from? And why are you worried? I said, "Lord, how am I going to pay the bills at the end of the month? And what about this and that?" And then it was as if the Lord was saying, "But I thought you said that I'm your source." And, so quite often we've learned these things, and we might even preach it or confess it, but once you're faced with those realities, in your personal life, and my wife and I also went through with 5 or 6 other couples through that small group study on finances. And, being in the church for many years and attending a whole lot of seminars and conferences and courses, I've never seen people cry so much as during that small group study on money. And every week for 10 weeks, whenever we would drive home, we would say, "What just happened there? Someone else in the group started crying tonight," because it's all these different topics, but it's very closely related to money. So I realized that there's a direct string from your wallet to your heart, or from your bank account to your heart. And the moment you pull on that wallet, you start crying. It's as if God knows how to get to your heart. And I think that's maybe the reason why, more than any other topic in the Bible, there are Bible verses on money.
Yeah.
More than heaven, more than hell, more than glory, anointing, throw the topic at us. Money is spoken the most of.
2,350 Bible verses.
Wow.
And it's 830 directly on money, and the second most is on basically on your religion, which is 500, just over the 500. So yeah, that is it is profound if you meet on that level. I mean, you need to get the concept behind what is important. And it's difficult to explain it. I think the closest explanation I heard of this, I hope all of you know about Louis Giglio, but he explained something that really got to me, where he said, and I want to challenge everybody with that today. He explains it that we have to understand that this is God's story. And God is busy with his story. He started this story, and he's going to finish it. Whether you like it or not, or whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. That's just the way it is. And he invites you to become part of that story. The problem we have, and this is a very fine line, is that we are all busy with our stories. Our business, our ministry, our family, and our whatever. And then we do a very Christian-like thing. We invite God into our story. Lord, please just come and guide us about this new expansion or this new branch we want to open. And Lord, just help us with the finances. And we are very Christian-like, involving God in our story. And it's as if God says, "Whoa, you're missing it. I'm actually busy with my story." When we operate in God's story, we don't have to pray for anointing. We are anointed. We don't have to pray for protection. We are protected. The question is that it's so closely. Are you busy in God's story, or are you busy with your story where you involve God into it? And that is something that has to, grow in our hearts. Because if we can get that, then a lot of it changes. I mean, one of the things that I ask myself every night before I go to bed, well, not every night, most of the nights when I go to bed, whose kingdom benefited today? Was it God's kingdom or mine? Because it's either one of the two. I can sit here and talk about God and hoping I will get compliments. Then I'm busy with my kingdom. I can sit in the office, speak to a lady who's about to get divorced. At the end of the day, it might be God's kingdom. It's not what we do, it's why we do it. By what are we driven? And by what do we measure it? If anyone here is in a business, ask yourself, do you measure it only on your bottom line as finances, or the impact we have in the kingdom? I was challenged by a question that Leonard Ravenhill asked. And I want to challenge everybody here today. And he asked, and when I read it, it got to me, and it gets to me every day. He asked, when was the last time you lost sleep over people dying without Christ? Because with all due respect, what do Christ lose sleep about? You understand, he doesn't sleep, but I mean, you get the point. If it's important to him, how important should it be to us as business people? And keep in mind, I'm not a pastor. So where does that feature on our planning? What is the purpose of the way we do business? I mean, making money, believe it or not, is a function. It's just one of those things you'll understand and you'll wait through it. But what drives us? What drives us? And it is so difficult to explain it. It is like righteousness. You have to live it. You know, getting back to our topic of worldview. You know, it's something that changes in you when you start taking decisions not in your intellect, but in your spirit being. When you have that, when you've been born again. And I cannot explain that to any but person. But those of you who know what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. It's just one of those things. So when people start responding from the flesh, and you get these politicians making these wild comments. In the past, I used to smile at it. Say, now I really do feel pity. I really do. Said, Lord, the answer is actually so simple. It's so simple. If we all can have this kingdom view.
You briefly told me about a situation you and your partners faced. I think it's a few years ago, and kind of the dilemma you were in is there are certain kingdom principles from the Bible and how to apply it in business. Mm-hmm. So do you mind sharing that boardroom moment with us, the difficult decision? And before you tell us what exactly the decision was or the outcome, we want to break to the groups and just come with a few creative answers.
Okay, this was in the beginning when I had to prepare for speaking engagements, and one of the verses that we deal with is 1 Timothy 5 verse 8, which says, he who doesn't take care of his own or even his own household is worse than an unbeliever. Now, the household portion we all get, we know who the household is, but who's our own? He who doesn't take care of his own. And I was actually sitting in office time, meditating on this, about what does this mean? Who's my own? Or is it my racial group? Is it, is it the people from church? Where does this, he doesn't take care of his own, fit in? And at that very moment, the lady who serves us with tea came into my office. And the moment I looked up from this work that I was doing regarding 1 Timothy 5, and it just dropped in my spirit, but isn't this lady, her name is Miriam, maybe one of your own? And I just felt convicted, and I thought, this must be. And usually, Miriam would come in quietly and put down the tea, and if she's lucky, I'll grant her thank you in her direction, and she would leave, That day, as she put down the tea, I said to her, thank you, please take a seat. She got the fright of her life. She thought she's going to get fired, I suppose. And she sat down and I said to her, Miriam, just tell me, how long have you been serving me tea? She said, no, it's over 2 years. I said, okay. I said to her, I just want to start with the basics. So you've been serving me for 2 years. Please tell me, what is your surname? Let's just start there for the beginning. Seeing that you're one of my own, can I at least know your surname? And then I started talking to her, and I asked her, where do you live? No, Kutlandong. Okay. How much does it cost you to get to work? 28 rands a day, so back throw, more than 50. How many children do you have? Well, daughter died, husband left her, she's got 9 people she's got to look after. And making the calculation, said, okay, got the questions, and I said to her, okay, you can go, thanks, Miriam. And as she left, I picked up the phone and I called our office manager, and I asked her, listen, how much are we paying, Miriam? Whew, God forgive me. I couldn't believe what we were doing. We paid a legal wage, make no mistake. But just because it was a legal wage doesn't mean it was the right wage. So we had a boardroom moment, sharing these ideas and saying, okay, let's ask ourselves, what is a living wage? I'm not saying you should do this. This is something that happened with us, for what it's worth. And we made an estimation in the area that we're living, how much does it cost for a family to survive? Forget about what the law says is the minimum wage. And we decided that this is the amount it takes a family in the gold fields to survive and many, if not most of our staff was under that, especially our entry-level staff. So we decided to address that. And we decided to bring everybody up to that wage, not the legal wage, but the minimum wage as determined, as we believe led to by the Holy Spirit. But then we had the real dilemma, and this is where the challenge comes in. Some people have been working there for 15 years, others for 5 months. Some people will now get an increase that will be more than 100%, others will not get an increase at all. Everybody that is doing the same job but for different years will not be equally treated. What are we going to do with the unions? Especially when some gets an increase and others don't, and it was no other reason than God told us so. So how do we handle that? That was our dilemma.
There's a boardroom moment. If we can take 5 or 6 minutes, and maybe around the table, discuss this dilemma. All of a sudden, you're in the boardroom of a law firm, and you're faced with this dilemma. Do we, don't we? How do we address this? We have a word from God, we believe, but how do we make it practical? And who gets the increase, who doesn't? So let's see, take 5 or 6 minutes. Can we maybe get feedback from 1 or 2 of the groups on how creative you were, and if you were in Andre and his partner's shoes, how would you have dealt with this situation? Because I'm sure he didn't reveal their financial status at the time, but I'm sure they weren't unlimited amounts of resources just piled up in the bank, ready to start, dishing out to everyone. So any feedback, any volunteers, 1 or 2 of the groups to maybe give us, can we hear from group 9?
Now the levels I'm talking about, if you get the ownership concept, and it's not something that you need to understand, believe me when I tell you this is something that the Holy Spirit makes you grasp. That is the concept of ownership, knowing that your children is not yours, is what makes people like Abraham willing to sacrifice. It's not because he was a teenager and he wanted to sacrifice Isaac. He was willing to sacrifice Isaac. That's the kind of things. I mean, John Wesley, the father of the Methodist Church, it is told that he was riding on his horse and somebody came to him and said, Mr. Wesley, your house burned down. His very first response, thank God, one less thing to account for. Would that be your response? If somebody comes to you now and say your car has been dented downstairs, whose BMW, whose car is this? Say, Lord, I don't know why you want a dent in your car, but you've got a big one now. and it sounds, but I mean, that's how it manifests at the end of the day. But as far as layers is concerned, it's a journey. We never arrive, but we all need to start. And when it comes to stewardship, you cannot start with stewardship if you don't start with ownership. This is God's country. This is God's business. If God wants to close down your business, nothing will let him keep it open. You might postpone it by going into debt on it, but it will close. But the inverse, if God wants to keep open his business that you're entrusted with, nothing will close it. You will just grow when you go through that rough patches and the storms are beating, and it will test the foundation. And if it falls, then no, build it on a better foundation next time. But everything starts with stewardship. But that starts with stewardship is based on ownership. I cannot be a good steward if I think something is mine. One of the most spiritual moments my wife and I had together is during that course. When you deal with ownership, you have to sign a deed of transfer, where we transfer things back to God that we kind of thought was ours. And me and my wife, we prayed. We really and said, Lord, what is there that we think is ours? And it started simple, the house, wada, and so on. And then it got real, our children. And having to sign over your children to God and knowing that he's entrusted them to you, and he will hold me to account in the way I raised them, that changes something. That changes something, and the same happens with business. But it all comes back to that. What do we believe? What do we say we believe, and what do we really believe? And I test, if I may do this one more test. If I can, because this is related to legal practice and when we do collections, I challenge business people always with this and say, make it real for yourself now. if God, you owe somebody 100 rands and God puts it in your heart to write off the 100 rands, and that person is going to come to you one day and say, listen, I owe you 100 rands. Say, man, I've written it off. And he's going to say to you, why? Say, God has blessed me and this is my life story. And that writing off of the 100 rands will save him for the kingdom. Will you write off 100 rands to save him for the kingdom? Be real now about this. You will. I'm sure you will. Now, you know where I'm going with this, but make it real for yourself. Somebody owes you 10,000 rands. And God puts it on your heart. Write it off. Because that will win him for the kingdom. Now it's 100,000. Now it becomes your nest egg that you have to write off to win a soul for the kingdom. Now if God, who's the owner of it all, can replace it all in a wink of an eye, and he was willing to see his son being tortured to death on a cross to win people for the kingdom, how much do you think he's willing to pay in monetary value to win people for the kingdom? But the moment I think it's mine, there comes a time where I say, Lord, that's the value of a soul. I'll do the 100 rand thing. Yes, we can push it to the 10,000 limit. But when it comes to my pension, whoa, this is not the value of a soul. Then why? And then you've just reached your limit. You think your pension is yours.